morning, and I want to recognize two incredibly special guests that we have here today. One is being held by Roddy Young, and the other is in a baby carriage right at the end of the table down here. Thank you for bringing our precious creatures to this place. I tell them, and I tell people sometimes when I see them in church and see an infant, that I had a professor in graduate school in developmental psychology who said, never miss the opportunity to flirt with an infant because you are looking into the face of God. I'm getting some feedback. Well, I need to tell you, I've had a lot of requests about the magic I've been doing in here. I'm going to keep doing it, in spite of that. Not today. All right, the reason the room is set up like this is that immediately after the third service, and we will not linger here, is that there is a meal here with hamburgers and hot dogs and ice cream outside, and it's all free. So if you want to come back after the 11 o'clock service for that meal, you're welcome to. And I don't often do commercials, but I will tell you that the offertory today in the worship service is a home run. It is one of the best things I've heard the choir do in forever, with 3 trumpets in the balcony. It's amazing. And then our new organ intern plays a Bador piece at the end of the service that is spectacular. So I'm just saying. It's wonderful. We are so lucky to have the talented musicians that we have in this congregation to do that. You would pay a lot of money to hear that somewhere else. And I hope you give a lot of money. Okay. Remember, no matter who you are, no matter where you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. There are a couple of quotes from Albert Einstein that I like to use, and from time to time. You've heard them before, but I want to do them. By the way, in case you have not caught on, I am trying to devote the first part of the talks that I offer here to some ongoing elucidation or illumination about what I mean by non-duality. And so I give myself that task every week to write something about that as we try to navigate this gap between the no longer and the not yet. So just to take you behind the scenes there. One of the quotes that I love from Einstein is, no problem can be solved with the same level of consciousness that created it. Now that's reason enough for leaving a story that is not serving us well for another one that can create the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. In every wise, useful spiritual tradition that I am aware of, the goal of being involved in spiritual practice of that tradition is to awaken. Now, that's a very dualistic way of speaking, because there is no place to get to in spiritual practice because we are already there. So what we do is we awaken from the dream of separation to know that separation is not true and never has been. It's an illusion. We have always been connected with all that is. Now, I want to show you a brief video that someone who attends this gathering electronically sent to me. And I'm doing it just to give you an altered state of consciousness. So Holly, if you will turn the lights out, And let's just hope this works.
One of the big challenges in my life has been to kind of break down this barrier as scientists being somehow the other. You know, being a scientist isn't really a normal way to be a human being. And somehow there are all these judgments about that you must be very logical or you must be very smart, whatever that means. And no one ever seems to really understand that when you learn where the atoms in your body came from, you know, when you learn the scale of the universe, when you learn the stories that you're involved in, there has to be some emotional response to that. You know, that just doesn't roll off you and never affect you. And I don't really have a great way to deal with everything that I've learned being an astrophysicist. You know, if I ever give people the impression that all this is just okay with me, that's entirely wrong. There are days when, you know, I understand that I'm a collection of atoms that came from the hearts of stars that briefly comes together and forms planets and people and everything that's in our world. And then, you know, I was observing one night at Mount Palomar where we were observing supernovae, and supernovae are the explosions of an entire solar system. The whole solar system is destroyed, a star and all of its planets. And our telescopes are so good now that at a typical night at Mount Palomar, you see about 20 of those a night. You know, you see 20 entire solar systems ripped apart every night. So we're here very briefly. You know, we're little collections of atoms that come together and scatter, and then form other things, and then, you know, travel on through the universe. And sometimes that's incredibly inspiring, and sometimes you think about the story that you're a part of. You know, the water in my body has hydrogen from the Big Bang, from the very start of the universe. Then the oxygen came from stars that had to die. You know, you hold your arms around yourself, and you have a story that's billions of years and, you know, trillions of miles across, just in your own self. And then you think about how brief we are, and how, you know, we are this little collection that comes together and disperses. And it, you know, sometimes I hide under the bed, and it's given me anxiety attacks. And you cling to the people that you love, and you have sex with all the wrong people, and you try to find some way to just kind of work out this energy that you don't know what to do with. So there's a balance between nihilism and inspiration. And I have to say that while that balance is sometimes painful, because you're a human being and you don't know how to deal with this scale of things, it is an absolutely wonderful place to walk. That balance between being part of everything and being so brief for almost nothing. And you have to hold those two things in your hands at the same time. And everybody you meet and everything you do in life, and when you're out grocery shopping, when you're driving on the highway, these thoughts just don't really ever leave. So it's not the easiest place to be. There's no great answer there. There's no great comfort. But the inspiring part is you're part of a story that is mind-blowingly dramatic and beautiful, even if you're a brief part. And so to me, the balance tips towards inspiration. Some days it's more towards the nihilism. But you take that little bit of truth and you wrap it up and you carry it with you, and it never really leaves.
So we do our practices. We give ourselves to the work of growing and learning to see with the eyes of the mind, the eyes of the heart, the eyes of the self, so that we are gifted with the awareness that the story of separation in which we are immersed as a culture is not true and never has been. You know, unless a person is mentally unbalanced, everyone has a desire for health and love and wholeness. And we live in a culture of dualism that pressures us toward contraction and fragmentation and division and dualism, me and that. And even though it is the nature of humans to grow old, get sick, and die, the fact is the mechanism of the cosmos is toward healing. Wounds heal. And we can participate in that process consciously, or we can participate in a story of separation. That choice is ours. We can only awaken from the dream of separation, from the nightmare, really, of separation, and recognize that it isn't true and never has been. And you know in your bones, without me having to marshal any evidence for it, that it is our attraction to wholeness that is the healthiest and noblest of things. We are attracted to that. It's who we truly are. Now, I know we experience ourselves as separate individuals. We live in a world where we have to account for ourselves as separate individuals. We have different roles at different parts of our lives. We have rules to follow in those roles. The wholeness that the cosmos is, though, is indifferent to our illusion of separateness. We've been conditioned and educated to think that the whole is something off there somewhere that we have to get to. We've been taught that the good of the individual, the family, the group, the political party, the nation is more important than the well-being of the whole. Now, it is so ironic and so perplexing that separate thinking is so productive. What that woman, that astrophysicist was saying is that we have telescopes now that allow us to see by dualism. It's dualism that has helped us produce all of these fine instruments. They're the very things that create these telescopes. All of this has been an enormous blessing, but it's also been a curse because it estranges us from our very source of being. We are, I fear, addicted to it. We live in what Terry Patton, who has significantly influenced my thinking, calls a consensus trance. This trance or level of consciousness has led us into the conflictual, destructive place where we are today. And conflict is not only between humans, it's also between humans and the planet, between our environment and us. And it seems that an increasing number of people in the world and in this country simply do not reside in the most trusted voice or person in America. Wow. Tim, edit that out. I know that there are people we cheer for, there are people we want to win, but who's the voice out there, not here, out there? a full inclusion at all levels in the life of the church for all people. Now, you wouldn't think, if you listened to Jesus, that this would be such a big deal. But it is. Lines of judgment are being made, just like in our political culture, that are straining relationships, causing some people to feel excluded, and causing other people that they have to go into overdrive to protect the doctrinal purity. In the Roman Catholic Church, new revelations about the sexual abuse of children and youth for decades by clergy are shaking the church to its core. Would want either one of those people as a role model for their children. But it's okay in our leaders. All these cases makes one wonder how the church can regain its credibility. How can the church learn to speak with any kind of moral authority? It makes us wonder, what are the main things that we truly value? And how do we keep them as the main things? So, who is the most trusted voice in American culture? I don't have an answer for that. What I was thinking the other night, while I was navigating from something I had recorded to something else, there's no way that I figured out to be able to do that without being exposed to what's on TV. I try not to watch it. And on one of the news shows that came up, there was a panel of people. You've seen this. And they were literally shouting at each other, talking over each other. You've seen this. I turned it off. And I went to bed that night and turned out the light, and I thought, God, I miss Walter Cronkite. No kidding. Here was a man who 3 years in a row, check it out, was voted the most trusted voice in America. A media guy, CBS. How did we get from there to where we are today? What we see happening in our culture is the end of an era. I spoke to Michael Dowd at length this week about coming here. God, I hope you come and hear him when he's here in November. He's so dynamic and so energetic. And he said, you know, looking over the long sweep of human civilization, we, the United States, has all the marks of the end of an era. He said, quote, if the precondition for creativity is chaos, then get ready for a lot of creativity, because we are about to undergo a lot of chaos. Thomas Merton, one of my spiritual heroes, because he was a teacher to another one of my spiritual heroes, Jim Finley. Thomas Merton once said, "Religion will not survive based on tribal consciousness. It will do itself in." And I think we can extrapolate from that nothing is going to survive based on tribal consciousness. One of the things we can learn from history is that we don't learn from history. Now, the way I would restate that, based on this current series of living in the gap between the no longer and the not yet, is that no matter what good we undertake to do, if it is done out of the story of separation, it will not ultimately save us. For that, we need a miracle. Which leads me to the other line of Einstein's that I like. There are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle, and then the other is as if everything is a miracle. And I'm calling this talk Living Life as a Miracle. We've begun to talk about miracles in these times together. I'm continuing to deconstruct the Christian tenets of the fundamentals of Christian, the tenets of Christian fundamentalism, and the one that we're up to is the tenet that says that the miracles that Jesus performed were literally true. They were things that you could capture on a video concept. And I think to think that way is to skim the surface. Such skimming, I think, is the major sin of our culture, not only when it comes to religion and spirituality, but also when it comes to life in general. The sin of superficiality is doing us in. We are, to use Neil Postman's phrase of his great book, we are entertaining ourselves to death. I think that's my answer to one of the ways we got to where we are. We have valued entertainment more than truth, being passively entertained. Now, you don't hear a lot about miracles today. They seem to have gone the way of the dinosaur. I remember a time before we had these things, digital cameras. You used to hear from time to time about flying saucers. Remember that? They usually came from the rural South. You don't hear about flying saucers much anymore. Now, although some people can do wonders with Photoshop, I typed into my search engine to Google, what is the most famous Photoshop picture ever? And this is it. This picture was allegedly found on a digital camera in the rubble after 9/11. It's Photoshopped, it's fake, but you don't know it unless somebody tells you it's fake or done the research to say that it's fake. To a thinking person, in this post-Copernican era, an age of science, the kind of miracles one reads about in the Bible are just difficult to buy into. All you have to do, go to Google and you can search out the truth about any claim somebody makes about something that is a miracle. A biblical and church scholar I respect a lot, a man who is a member of the Jesus Seminar, John Shelby Spong, and I know some of you have read his book, Unbelievable, Why Neither Ancient Creeds nor the Reformation Can Produce a Living Faith Today. I highly recommend this book if you have not read it. It's an easy read. I know the book group read it here, but it's a very accessible way to get an overview into what progressive Christians what progressive Christians are thinking today. This is what biblical scholarship miracles don't exist. He said miracles don't imply magic. So what can we possibly mean when we talk about miracles or the miraculous? Now, if you've been here very long, you know that one of my teaching goals is to contribute to biblical literacy. And I'm saying that this is a time for boldness. I want our spiritual and religious work to awaken and liberate us so that we can be empowered to change the world. We are the people that we have been waiting for. That's a story that's not of separation. Now, I want to be very clear about something. I'm not trashing the church or my I have benefited from it in so many ways, but I also don't want to be blinded by or bound to it in such a way that I can't participate in constructing the very future that my past taught me was important. What I have learned from it is that how we behave is far more important than what we believe. Peace, love, joy, and patience trump doctrine every time. I want these times together to challenge us to move, whether we have to crawl, limp, walk, or run, out of our comfort zone into a space where loyalty to the tribe does not blind us to what is or bind us to beliefs and behaviors that contribute to separation. We have got to learn how to be present with intelligent heart with intelligent hearts. That make sense? That's the goal of spiritual work. So, what I want to teach about today see me after class. I will pray for you. Everybody knows this story. You know the word whale is never mentioned in the story? Never. Well, we get to that. So, we're going to go to the Balkans in a few weeks at the end of September. And I have been reading a story of the history of the Balkans. And it has been the site of the largest genocide on the planet over the centuries. Embodying peace, love, joy, and patience from an integral perspective, I know is very difficult. And I'm thinking, this last year I added the word patience to it. I'm thinking about adding another word. Peace, love, joy, patience, and humility. Ken Wilber writes, no one is smart enough to be wrong 100% of the time. Think about it. Every perspective, including the one you hear from me, is partial and true, both partial and true. So, let's go back to the story of Jonah. So, in order to understand the story of Jonah that I would like to tell you, you have to understand what was going on in the Jewish mind at that time. Around 600 BC, Jerusalem This was an enormous shock to the Jewish mind. The Jewish people believed that they lived under the protection of God and that they were God's special chosen people, that God would not allow anything to happen to them. And now both of those beliefs were destroyed. They were gone. So for several generations, the Jews were exiled from their homeland. And finally, after 200 years, that's a long time, the Babylonians were defeated by the Persians. And the Persians didn't really care what the Jews did, so little by little they began to go back into Jerusalem, and over a long period of time they began to rebuild their homeland. And they wanted to make sure, as anyone would, that a horrendous thing like what happened to them under the Babylonians would never happen again, so they began to put their thinking caps on to figure out, why did it happen in the first place? If we're special and God is protecting us, what in the world has caused this? And they came up with this idea that maybe our ancestors did something to offend God and to get even, God punished us. And then they thought, no, we can't say that, because that would be a violation of one of the 10 Commandments, to honor our parents. So they did what any person would do with dualistic mind. They blamed somebody else. They sought out a group of people that they could say, you know, some of our weaker ancestors married outside of the Jewish race. They married into these Gentile, they were called, peoples, and they corrupted our bloodline, they corrupted our customs, they corrupted our worship, and we need to fix that. So they said, this land really needs to be for Jews only. So they began to put laws in place. Vigilante squads were sent out and given instructions to check bloodlines and families. If you couldn't show that your bloodline went back 10 generations, they did the only spiritual thing they could do, they killed you. Or exiled you. So they entered this state of internal violence in the Jewish religion or Jewish race. And many of the laws that we have enacted in the book of, see in the book of Leviticus, were written during this time. The Jews wanted to make themselves special. And so they said, well, one of the things we can do is get guys to get circumcised, so that it would be apparent by the way you look whether you were Jewish or not. That would be one way. Another way, you can't marry unless you marry somebody who is Jewish. That would be another way to protect purity. Another way is we're going to change all our dietary rules. This is what you have to do. If you're Jewish, you eat this way. This is kosher food, and because people eat together in groups, that begins to separate. You have to wear clothing of a certain kind. And that's where the rule about that many conservatives today use about homosexuality came from during this book of Leviticus. And if, I've done this, and I invite you to try it for yourself. I've had conversations with conservative people about the law in Leviticus that forbids homosexuality, and I'll bring up this background about how those laws got in place in the first place. They weren't written for us. And this is the response I get. Yeah, I know that. That's true. But there are also some things in Paul. And then they'll go off and have the same Leviticus conversation with somebody else down the road. It just doesn't work. So, there was a prophet. We don't know who it was. He didn't like this. And he wanted to challenge what was becoming a prevailing attitude. People were getting killed. They were getting exiled. He couldn't do this openly, because if he did, that would be interpreted as inviting a new defeat. You understand what I'm saying? He couldn't say, this is wrong. So he had to make his attack in a very subtle way. And but they had to be attacked, because what the Jewish people were doing had all the elements of self-destructiveness in them. Now, a little aside. We have a lot of policies in place in politics and in our religious establishment that are only going to end up shooting ourselves in the foot. Okay? You don't give people a good public education, that's your future. You don't include everybody in the church, that's your future. So I know we're only maintaining doctrinal purity or ensuring the win for our group or whatever it is that we've been fighting so long about. There are a lot of parallels between what was going on in the Jewish race at that time and what's going on in the United States today. At any rate, this guy decided to write a story. A fanciful story filled with exaggeration of a world of make-believe that would be so enchanting that everybody would want to hear this story. And when he finished it, it appeared suddenly and anonymously in Jerusalem at the height of ethnic cleansing. And as was the custom, the town crier gathered some people around him in Jerusalem, and this is the story that he told. Once upon a time, there was a prophet in Israel whose name was Jonah. God called Jonah and told him, "You must go preach to the people of Nineveh." "Nineveh," proclaimed Jonah, "you've got to be kidding. That's an unclean Gentile city. Why would you want me to do anything like that?" But God was adamant. God's message was clear. So Jonah had to respond. He did so in the classic way that people do when they are told by an authority figure to do something they do not really want to do. Jonah said yes, but he meant no. He had no intention of obeying. But he went through all the motions of obeying. He went down to the port, he bought himself a ticket, he booked passage on a boat, but his ticket was to Tarshish, not to Nineveh. You wouldn't go to Nineveh by boat. And he reasoned to himself, if I ever get caught, I'll just say I didn't understand what you said. And by that time, God would surely have changed his mind anyway. So everything went well. Jonah went down and boarded the ship. He went down, unpacked his suitcase, put on his best Bermuda shorts, got a book, went up on deck, pulled a deck chair up, got a drink. They pulled out into the Mediterranean Sea. And the trip was uneventful until a dark cloud in the sky seemed to be shadowing the boat. Aware of this dark presence above him, the captain tried to escape it, first by turning right and then by going to the left. But the cloud moved in concert with the boat. The rest of the sky was clear and blue, but this cloud got darker and darker from within. Lights, flashes of lightning came. It became darker. The roar of thunder came. Rain began to fall. So strange was this phenomenon that the captain drew the obvious conclusion: somebody up there does not like somebody down here. And in what he regarded as a very scientific fashion, he identified the culprit by drawing straws. And Jonah got the short straw. "What have you done, Jonah?" the captain asked. "Well, God told me to go to preach to the Ninevites, but I knew that God could not possibly care for the Ninevites, so I booked passage on your boat instead." Now the captain, who did not care for the Ninevites either, understood, and he said, "Okay, we can ride out the storm." He said that until a bolt of lightning struck nearby, and a wave swept over the boat, hurling Jonah's deck chair from one end of the ship to the other, and the captain said, "That's enough." So the captain was more interested in his own security than anything else, so with the help of 3 deckhands, Jonah was seized by his limbs, and on the count of 3, the men heaved Jonah over the edge of the boat. Jonah never hit the water, because God had prepared for Jonah a great fish. And Jonah went directly into the mouth of the fish, which had been swimming in tandem with the boat all this time, just waiting for this moment. So Jonah found himself living in the belly of a great That's all he said. No one should hear. But to his amazement, everyone heard. Crowds poured into the streets from every house, every condominium, every apartment, confessing their sins, tearing their clothes in repentance, and begging God for forgiveness. Jonah became the most successful evangelist in the history of the world. Modern televangelists would eat their hearts out for this kind of response. Jonah was, however, angry at this. He stormed out of the city. He said, I knew this would happen. That's why I didn't want to come. These wretched people deserve punishment. I know you. Jonah found a spot outside the city where he sulked. He sat. You could hear the sound of the revival in town. Sweet hour of prayer was being sung. Trust and obey. Come to the altar just as I am. All that stuff. God was strangely silent. Jonah went to sleep, and when he woke up, there was a giant plant that had grown up to provide him shelter from the heat of the day. It's a hilarious story. The people roared at the depth of Jonah's bigotry until they realized that they were Jonah. You know, the Bible is the only book I know that is not only written from the perspective of people on the bottom, but it also has this self-critical element in it. The little book of Jonah is in the Bible to say that the love of God is unbounded by any human limits put on it or by religion's inability to be inclusive. There are no boundaries on the love of God. That's the message of the book of Jonah. How dare anyone or any institution put anyone beyond God's embracing love? The book of Jonah stands as a judgment against all such attitudes. It's a great story. I hope we can hear it. If we can, we will live miraculous lives. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this: you carry precious cargo, so watch your step, and I will see you here next week. Thank you.